We ready?
We gotta go fast. Yes, this is hot.
It's actually not that bad.
It's not bad.
It will be later. All right.
I just love that sound. It's my
yes,
favorite.
It is.
I love
It's
it
a
so much.
cheap Vietnamese import. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Chalkboard History. We are going to talk today. Well, it's Chalkboard History, Volume 2, Year 2. Oh, my God. I found Mr. Lincoln's head.
No.
Oh, no.
Oh, God, that's so bad.
We're off to quite a start. So today we're going to talk about, well, he lost his head, and we're going to talk today about a guy who lost an arm.
You know his men called him Old One Wing?
I didn't know
That seems inappropriate.
You mean Lincoln? Or
No,
the guy
no,
we're
no,
talking
no,
about?
no,
Right,
no, the guy we're talking about.
So we're going to talk today about William Loring. William Wing.
Wing Loring, so
Wing
it's perhaps
Loring.
appropriate.
So I think that William Loring is an immense amount of fun because his division is heavily engaged at the Battle of Franklin, and so I wrote a lot about Loring in years past, and when we were saving, for example, the
Eastern Flank
Golf Course and Country Club, which was the eastern flank of the battlefield, we talked a lot about Loring's guys. So tell us a little bit about Mr. Loring.
Well, he's an interesting guy. If there's a career military guy on the field at Franklin, it's going to be Loring because he starts when he's young. He and his family are living in the Florida Territory when it's still wild and woolly, and it's not even a state yet. And he joins the Florida militia when he's only 14 years old. They call him the boy soldier, and he likes it so much that when he hears about what happened at the Alamo, he decides he wants to be part of that too. He runs off to Texas, and his daddy comes after him and brings him back home.
But not a West Pointer.
Not a West Pointer, no. He's going to get his education on the field, although he does go to school. I mean, they send him to Alexandria and to Georgetown, and he passes the bar, serves a term as in the Florida House of Representatives, but the Mexican War, that's where he's going to find his groove.
So he's born in North Carolina
Yeah.
in 1818, and he fights actually Seminole Indians.
Yeah. Like Benjamin and James here.
Right,
Is that
but
where they go?
it's way later.
Yeah. Two different
it's
phases.
the second, third, or 15th Seminole War, whatever it was. But yes, it's in the Mexican War that he is very badly injured and loses an arm. And there's this, apocryphal story in the 1840s. Chloroform wasn't in widespread use yet, so he was hauled off the field while smoking a cigar.
And they just sits there and.
So who knows whether that's actually true or not? But his Civil War career is I think extremely interesting, and I learned about Loring. He is. I don't know. Actually, I do know there was a monument to Loring in Florida, which was then later moved to a cemetery. But he's not exactly like in the pantheon of Confederate generals, but he's really fun because early on in basically what is today West Virginia, and at the time was just Virginia, the Romney expedition, he runs afoul of Thomas Stonewall Jackson because Stonewall Jackson could be a complete pain in the ass. And he was driving his men up through these mountains in January 62, the dead of winter. So they're slugging through the snow and the cold and the wind, and guys are getting frostbite and they're collapsing, and he's just driving them relentlessly, and it gets to be such a situation that they're preferring charges against one another. It's like we're gonna sue each other, but it's court-martials. So Jefferson Davis and Judah Benjamin have to separate them, like 15-year-old boys scrapping in the yard. And so Jackson stays in the east, and Loring got shuttled out west, that begins his
trajectory here. Eventually ends up at Vicksburg. Right, fights there.
Well, no, he never ends up in Vicksburg. What happens is at the Battle of Champion Hill, as John Pemberton's army is falling back to the Vicksburg defenses, Loring's like, nope, I'm going the other way. Yeah. And he I don't know.
He links up with Johnston, right?
Disobeying orders or just doing what he thought was right. He just peels off the army and then got connected to Joe Johnston, who was, sitting around in Jackson not doing a whole lot. But so then, Loring fights through with the Army of Tennessee through the Atlanta campaign. I was just, it may have been Dave Powell. Dave's has written a ton about Atlanta, but he's working on this big multi-volume trilogy, 5 quadruple trilogy. It's a bunch of books.
More books than you? What?
Yes. Well, Dave's probably a better writer than I am. But anyways, Loring was a guy that, because of his record, which was pretty good, he was actually considered for Corps command in the summer of '64.
He takes over Polk's for a minute. When Leonidas Polk is killed, he steps in.
Right. But then who fills that permanently?
A.P. Stewart.
Right. So he doesn't get the gig.
And he's a little distressed about that.
Yeah, I don't think he was terribly happy. But his men thought a lot of him. Walter Rohrer, who is buried at Carnton, wrote a number of letters to his, I think his sister. And in a couple of them, he talks about Loring. And in one of them, it's early '64, he's describing Loring, who had he was almost bald, but he had kind of long hair and back. Little ringlets. But apparently, the funniest part of that letter was that he said something to the effect of, Loring had great oratory where he would curse voluminously. Read it.
Yeah, let it. Upon his general, when he finds his artillery or wagons stalled, he curses them out of the mire by main force. At such a time, his power seems magical. It almost seems he can curse a cannon uphill without horses. His anger is terrible, and his power of vituperative language almost inconceivable.
Yeah, so we love, I think, to think about the Civil War generals, have such good manners and they're poised and pleasant and polite, and yes sir and yes ma'am. And then you have a guy like Loring, and he's a Southerner. I mean, you can't say, Yankees had bad language.
No.
Loring is screaming and cursing because he's trying to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And so, but he doesn't fit that West Point model.
Right.
He's not really a refined kind of soldier, by the book soldier. He actually is a little bit like Pat Claiborne in the sense that I think they were just good commanders. They inspired
good instincts, good
their
leaders.
Men. And then there's Franklin. So, he doesn't get Corps command. He's down on division level, and he's in A.P. Stewart's Corps.
Right.
And at Franklin, his men take just horrendous losses. Carnton became Loring's field hospital, and he lost almost at least 25% of his division, maybe upwards of 30%. So many men in the 12th Louisiana and the 3rd Mississippi and the 22nd Mississippi and the 33rd Mississippi are all buried at the cemetery at Carnton, and those men had been engaged at Peachtree Creek under his command earlier in the summer.
And they just faced a gauntlet at Franklin because they have the artillery fire the whole time they're coming across the field, and then when they hit the line, they run into that Osage Orange abattis that they can't get through. Some of them try to sneak down in the railroad cut, and then the cannons open up on them there. So it's just one thing after another.
There's a moment which was written about later on, and I don't know if it's McNeely, the chaplain. He said that Loring was yelling into the fury, "Great God, do I command cowards?" And even in my book I wrote, no, they weren't cowards. They just ran into a wall of iron and lead and those nasty thorny bushes. And they just took so many losses. And I always thought that Stewart's men, so it's Loring's division, Edward Walthall and Samuel French, had suffered in almost anonymity on that side. So it was really nice to see that part of the field preserved. And then Loring's there until the end. But his post-war career is crazy wild.
Yeah.
So he ends up in
Egypt.
He ends up commanding troops. I think the dude just liked to fight.
He did. Give me a fight anywhere.
Yeah. So he ends up commanding troops in Egypt. And I think at some point they ended up in what is today the modern-day Sudan.
They went against the Abyssinians or something,
right.
Ethiopia.
Loring wrote a book about his excursion into the Arab or Muslim world, and I've always wondered, he must have been quite a chapter in his life, because I would assume he was going to write about his career as a soldier in the Confederate Army, or even his pre-war stuff, but he never got around to that.
Yeah, I think he was working on a memoir maybe when he died. But writing about Egypt for most people who lived in the United States it's like writing about Mars today. I mean, it's a whole other world. That
his writing about the culture and about the religion, he saw the pyramids. I always thought the most interesting part, he's talking about Bedouins. And his description of the Bedouin people and their nomadic nature, and they were herding sheep and goats. I mean, it must have. I think that Loring is a guy who's often not thought of as a man of some culture and intellect, and he really, really was.
Well, he traveled widely all over Europe, and
his book is about that time in his life is really, really interesting. So Loring died in New York City. And he died in the winter, and so they couldn't move his body until...
He was cremated, right? And initially buried
I don't know if... Was he cremated?
I think it said he was cremated.
I don't know if he's cremated or he's put in a crypt, or whatever. They took him back, because he had an adopted home in Florida, so they took him to...
St. Augustine.
They took him to St. Augustine, yeah.
I think.
And buried him. And Loring is another example of how the past and the present, often intersect. And years later, they moved. He was buried in a cemetery, right? Just like
10,000 mourners.
Right, just like Nathan Bedford Forrest, buried in a cemetery. And he was moved to the center of town, and a monument was put up over him in, I think, 1920 or thereabouts. And of course, in recent years,
2020, 100 years later.
100 years later, whatever was left of his mortal remains were moved back to a cemetery. The monument was removed, and I like to think that finally maybe he can just rest in peace and be left alone, and we can study his life. He's one of those characters that is probably not well known in Civil War circles, like I mentioned earlier, but he's critically important. We talk about William Loring every single day.
Yeah.
Because his command swept past Carnton. His men were the wounded from his division were brought back to Carnton. And
he lost a brigade, commander.
Well, his brigade commander, John Adams, one of the Confederate generals who's killed, he's gone. Thomas Scott, another brigade commander, is so terribly wounded. Scott never really recovered from his injuries, died in New Orleans about 10 years after the war. And then Winfield Scott Featherston was almost killed. His horse shot out from underneath him. And Featherston's unit had grievous losses. So many of Featherston's guys are buried in the cemetery. And, I think William Loring is just a very interesting and worthy character of study. So, when you think about the Confederacy and you think about guys like this, I really wish that he could have written a memoir.
It would have been good to know what he thought.
It would have been really interesting to know his thoughts 20 to 25 years after the Civil War.
Because he's one of those guys like John Bell Hood, like James Longstreet, who simply moves on. He doesn't seem to spend a lot of time wallowing in what could have been. He just moves on and does the next right thing.
Yeah. Well, or takes the next adventure, and then I've never quite figured out why he lived in New York City. I mean, there's got to be...
So I think he was tried working in the banking industry. I don't know that went real well. And so once he had the opportunity... Sherman, interestingly, is the person I think that reaches out to him and says, hey, there's this gig in Egypt. You interested?
Yeah. I didn't know that. Sherman...
Because it's when he's the commander of the U.S. Army at that point. Grant's president. He's commanding the army. And so when the... Khedive, is that how you say that?
The Khedive
of Egypt reaches out. Right. He's like, hey, you'd be a good choice for this.
Huh. Yeah, so if you ever get a chance, read his book about his excursion into the Muslim world, because it's pretty interesting. But there's also a reasonably good biography about Loring, written by a guy named Jerry Raab, Raab. It's pretty short, but it's the only bio I'm aware of about William Loring. But anyways, come and see Franklin. Come and see where Loring's men fought, and do a little reading on him. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Thanks, everybody.